Hello and welcome to the fifth episode of IDpodcast. We are back here today with two of, I would say, legends of the podcast already that haven't been there last time for the last two. So we've got Jeremie and Peter here. Welcome back, gentlemen.
Thank you, Roger.
And we have a new guest with Doug Reeman here. So welcome to you, Doug. I guess to explain to the episode who you are, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you've done in the past and obviously why you are in gambling maybe as well.
Absolutely, and thanks very much indeed for the kind invitation today. For the last 2 years, I've been self-employed, and my company is Gambling Compliance and Risk Consultants. We specialise in providing audits and effectively compliance health checks for land-based and all sorts of gambling, bingo, retail betting shops and online.
Okay.
Prior to that, I worked for 10 years in the industry, in the land-based industry, principally in security and in the role of money laundering reporting officer for a large land-based casino, Caesars Entertainment in particular. That gave me a lot of grounding in the work I do at the moment. Heavily involved at the moment with audit reviews and just basically looking at remediation work on behalf of clients and steering them through the regulatory process.
Okay, and because you obviously were also at the City of London Police, so do you think that also helped a little bit to get your foot in quicker into the roles you've been, or did that experience help at all?
Yes, absolutely. I've before I actually came into the industry, which was back in 2007. By that time, I'd worked for 18 years with the City of London Police. Ostensibly heavily involved with the financial investigation unit. In fact, I headed it up for 4 years. Prior to that, was involved with the asset recovery unit. So principally our work involved largely around confiscation and asset recovery. With that qualification and experience of effectively confiscating the bad guys' assets, that gave me a very good groundwork into the type of work that in the industry, particularly it came down to looking at customer due diligence, enhanced due diligence and those type of things. And more importantly, looking at it from a practical point of view and then being able to use that experience from a law enforcement into seeing the challenges that brings as an operator. Okay. So I found that hugely helpful.
I mean, that's very interesting. I mean, probably I would have already now 10 or 20 questions, to delve into that, I guess. But what I wanted to start it off with today is I just wanted to, because it is actually last podcast before the new year. So as you know, people in mid-December, they start doing things around, highlights of the year. Just to recap, what happened. So maybe straight to you, Peter. What was your highlight this year? Maybe from a, let's say, gambling overall level. What was the kind of biggest thing, and maybe also like a personal a thing added to that as well?
I think by far the biggest thing all year has just generally been around regulation, wherever that is, and whether it's the UK imposing big fines or whether it's other regulators trying to take that blueprint and develop their solution to regulations around that. I think that's the big driver for everything. Clearly, from my own perspective, from an identity background, it's all around watching that new tech develop. And if there's one area, it's around sort of self-exclusions and how jurisdictions are trying to build out that tech, tie in their ID with that. So whether that's the UK GAMSTOP and the challenges they've got, or the Malta trying to be a much bigger and more ambitious programme, that's the area I've been concentrating on. So that, I guess for me, it's regulation in those areas of identity.
Okay. And Jeremie, what about yourself?
Yes, definitely regulation being the new force to reckon with. But I think in more precise words, the power of point of consumption in the regulatory world versus the point of supply. This is now nearly the end of point of supply. As we know it, this is going to become a fierce competitive territory for the point of supply jurisdictions. And point of consumption is now an accepted rule, is now an accepted principle in Europe, in the US as well, which is, I think, also my second biggest point here around what happened in 2019. The US expansion of regulations in a point of consumption model with its own very particular American flavor is definitely one of the biggest change of this year. And finally, I think that the third point I see is the hidden regulation coming, especially from the US. And I'm thinking about the regulation from the sorts of Apple, for example, which are becoming the new jurisdiction, where no company has yet any compliance department looking into the regulations and requirements, and that links to what you said in matters of technology. Technology regulation is becoming probably what will be the next big topic, and that will come on top of this point of consumption rule.
Okay, and what about yourself, Doug?
I think this year has, provided many challenges, particularly with my focus on, if I was looking at land-based operations, for example, looking, in fact, going back to 2017 and 18. I think one of the things that I saw coming up for sort of fairly promptly was the issue of affordability, and that's based on casework. A lot based on common sense, to be honest with you. So throughout 2019, my highlights have been, and particularly focused on work with various clients, is teaching them how to take on board the importance of affordability. And if you look at that, it's very much a prescriptive approach. I think it's approaching as far as the license condition is concerned, and how to balance that against the AML sector, which is very much still a principle of risk-based approach. And I found that been quite interesting over the last few months as what we call a steep learning curve for the operators. But that's been a highlight and a focus for me throughout 2019.
Okay, perfect. So in the last few weeks, though, there was a lot of events, a lot of gaming events. There was some that some of us attended together, like an example, gaming in Spain. There was obviously the Sigma in Malta, and there was also the KPMG Malta. And at every single one of them, obviously affordability was a very, very big topic. I mean, as we just heard. Then regulation in the areas as they are, if it's Spain, if it's Malta, was very important. And I think it kind of fits into what you guys just said, because regulation is becoming a very, very big thing, and obviously how the regulators are gonna manage the whole thing. Now, obviously there's two sides to it for me. I think there's technology, and obviously there is the people who actually operate, right? So it's the operators and the technology to it. So. And we discussed on a panel and the Gaming in Spain events how our regulators currently, dealing with that, and we did that in episode 1 as well. And I think every time everyone says, the regulators have to realize and work also a lot more with the technology providers, because at the moment there is, some bits here, some bits there. And they're not bringing it together. So what would be again? And I think we talked about it, but now that we've heard so much input from these different events, we've heard it in Spain, we've heard it in Malta. Who do you think has been the first one to really deal with it properly? And are there any signs of getting better at that?
Well, I don't know if anybody's got the full handle on it. I think what's more interesting for this particular podcast, as Doug's here, is looking at how that land-based and online's converging, because I think they've always been seen to be slightly different. So if we're looking at regulators, there's not many people like Doug will know as many as you do, certainly from a UK perspective. So I'm more interested in sort of that data and tech in an offline world, be it retail or land-based. What's your view on it, Doug, around sort of how technology and ID is being implemented from a land-based side?
I think if you look at it, break it down to two parts. So if I look at it from a fintech point of view to start off with, if we go back a couple of years ago now, the land-based industry has been, together with the Gambling Commission, talking to UK payments and looking at the possibility of increasing the use of contactless and what we call card technology within the land-based environment. Historically and currently, very much cash still plays a predominant role in the land-based sector. And I think that one of the things that the land-based sector have accepted and have taken on board is that over time and in the not-too-distant future, cash will be, to a certain extent, will disappear. And we've already seen that throughout other sectors. For example, you can't buy a cup of coffee in some places with cash now. I think over time, the cash levels will come down. There's been a certain amount of resistance, for example, by the Gambling Commission to accept the need for like contactless payments, for example, to be used in a land-based environment because the rules that currently exist, for example, an ATM machine must be a certain distance away from a table or from any other gaming machine. And there's certain distance rules between like a gaming table and a machine. Now, coming back to the aspects of technology in particular, but the Gambling Commission have not accepted, I think it's too much of a risk to allow a customer to use contactless technology, albeit with restrictions, for example, at £30 a transaction.
Yeah, but wouldn't that be, people that are listening to this, they'll be asking themselves now, surely with technology and with contactless, obviously technology, you could really limit like a player to a certain amount because you certainly have the name obviously on the card, etc. And but obviously if someone has cash, that's obviously pretty much anonymous, right? So what would be the reason for them not to really enforce that kind of electronic payment side?
I think they would see it that unless the industry could demonstrate having controls within both their membership databases and and talking to the bank or the card issuer, for example. And I have to make the point now that the technology was very much being sold on the basis that it would be mobile phone technology rather than the card, because obviously there's a risk of the card being misused by fraudsters. Yeah. So the industry was trying to use or persuade the Gambling Commission that the correct way to do it. And the other thing that's important that at the moment, the controls that are there online through online payments, everything can be tracked and monitored from the time it leaves the bank account to an electronic wallet and the time it goes back. Yeah. So there's a complete audit trail. In a land-based environment, to a certain extent, you've got debit card payments, you've got cash, you've got bank transfers, and you've got cash packets that get issued and may come back into the environment. But the whole issue of tracking and monitoring a customer's journey is completely different from online because there's always a break in the audit trail. So we was trying, we're saying to the Commission that if the land-based would have the opportunity to use modern-day technology in a modern-day casino environment, that would provide better opportunities for the operator to track and monitor a player, importantly from affordability and a social responsibility point of view. And of course, with the financial technology available these days, it would also allow the land-based to put in place controls which limits can be placed by the customer themselves or by the operator.
So you said they're the opportunity to do that. Are the regulations stopping them doing that? What's it?
There's nothing. At the moment the regulations. What the Gambling Commission's argument is that the use of contactless technology is contrary to the way the Social Responsibility Code.
Yeah,
and it provides too much opportunity. The whole concept being that. There's supposed to be a break in play.
Yeah, it's that immediate access to cash, effectively.
That's right. So if you run out of funds, for example, the expectation would be that you would have to leave a table or leave a machine to top up.
Yeah.
But essentially, there's a break in play from a social responsibility point of view. Now, yes, that does present challenges, but again, even with the use of mobile technology, we would say, with putting your thinking caps on and working in partnership with the regulator. There would be a way of having a break in play and using technology at the same time, and at the same time providing a balance for social responsibility.
So I guess an example. Let's say instead of having the payments directly at the table, because obviously there would be a break of play if a player would have to go to an example like a cashier to get his chips, but still did a contactless payment. But if an example a card is registered against his personal profile, because obviously most of UK casinos, they have membership cards in order to gain access. So would it be an example, an idea to register a certain card against a membership and only let the customer use this card to, an example, withdraw funds? I mean,
I think here, Roger, the key element is not really just the customer journey and the technology enabling those different steps, pauses, breaks, etc. It's a question around anonymity of the players. And because from the moment that you have access to the full identity and the full behavior and customer journey of someone, even if he's going to contactlessly, seamlessly put funds at the table, at the machine, or things like that, you have the ability from the time that you recognize, you identify the player, to block the payment, to block the transaction. So the technology is here. The real debate is around anonymity in land-based gaming, which I believe does not exist anymore in the online world. And this is something, just to finish on that point, this is something that is becoming more and more really in the trends of the technology. You're going to all the free-to-play in the online. This is coming. The mobile first approach that you were talking about is anyway coming. The regulations are going to confront themselves to this power of the mobile technology, where you will be able to seamlessly, like Bank ID allows in Sweden, etc., to connect to the bank account and play directly, seamlessly. No customer user. This is what Apple is going to do also with its identifier. But someone will have the point of responsibility of KYC, of the identity of the player. And from the moment that there is full responsibility, then everything will be available.
I think that's a key. The KYC thing, ultimately, most of it comes back to that. So over the years, Doug and I have crossed paths. It's been looking at why online's different from offline, vice versa. Where do you think they are now? And I absolutely agree the two paths are converging when it comes to identity. But where do you see the land-based sector as it is right now, and what do you think's going to be changing over the next sort of year or two?
Well, I mean, where it is at the moment, I think that if you look at the larger operators, without naming names, but the larger operators have embraced what I would call better technology in terms of what we call customer relationship databases. They're evolving over time to take on board the enhancement of the social responsibility regime in terms of like customer interactions and monitoring, and allowing customers to place limits, and indeed operators to place limits. So it's very much sort of coming in line with the online industry. But moving forward, there's one thing that I've felt, certainly in the last couple of years, is that whilst that's a good fit for a big operator who's got the resources behind them to bring on board that type of technology, some of the small operators are using very old systems and legacy systems, which don't really, what I would say, are nowhere near the standard that online are doing. So the ability to track and monitor a player, for example, or embrace financial sort of fintech or indeed regtech coming in behind it, are very constrained at the moment. So that's one of the challenges coming forward. That said, one of the things the Gambling Commission have made quite clear, now the industry's been crying out for years to have more machines and better, more machines in their premises, for example. The Gambling Commission say that's fine. We would support that, but you would need to demonstrate to us as the regulator and indeed the wider public that your technology and controls are, again, brought up to a standard that would allow us to support the increase in machines. Mm-hmm. Now, that in itself provides a bit of a challenge because in order to invest, it's a bit of a sort of catch-22 situation. You would probably need more machines in order to get more funds over time, responsibly, from customers in order to invest. But at the moment, it's been that sort of school of thought as far as the operators are concerned, is that unless we've got a clear indication from a regulator that they will support enhancement and improvement and more machines for the industry, then they will meet that with more investment in technology.
But isn't it a bit a fig leaf for the land-based industry to claim that technology, and the Gaming Commission is playing that game as well? Isn't the real problem the acceptance of the end of anonymity for the players? Because technology, even when it wasn't that mature, when it wasn't fully deployed in the online world, has been compiled by cumbersome Excel files, information, things like that. Technology has never been the trigger. It has been the enabler and making more efficient. But at heart, it was the online industry accepted that players are tracked. And at worst, the payment methods were not necessarily clearly related when it was e-wallets and things like that. But there was a clear...
so you saying the online world accepted that and moved quicker than the offline? Is that not just regulation not forcing them to? Or I'm assuming it's a bit of the old argument as would we ever identify everybody if you didn't have to because it's costly and complex. When regulation demands...
Yeah, but is it costly and complex nowadays? I mean, we obviously heard. I mean, it's by now there's many solutions that would allow you to do it obviously a lot cheaper, and then obviously on the other side
and
you
I
have
think
the side,
for the three of us, all four of us, in our world, absolutely cost is coming down, streamlining processes quicker. But I guess what you're saying is if that mindset is still set back in the old ways of the land-based, then any costs, it's costly. It's nowhere near as costly as what it could be.
Online remains an e-commerce industry at the end of the day, and the operators are making the most of those constraints into improving the efficiencies of marketing, BI, behavioral analytics for protection of harm, but also for marketing purposes. The land-based industry, as I see it from the online eyes, is still more of an entertainment industry that wants to offer products and entertainment services to its customers without requiring from them the constraining identity or follow the identity checks are here, but the follow-up on the player and follow-up of the behavioral analytics around, okay, which machine did you go, which venue, where do you go, what do you do, and I'm going to cater for you something based on the full transparency of your activity with us, seems to be, for me, the reason why this is not progressing rather than waiting for the regulation or the technology or the combination of both.
I think that coming back to the point I was making about the larger operators, some of the land-based operators in Great Britain, for example, have other interest in online, whether that be in Great Britain or overseas. And it's those providers who have to, as a result of a licence condition anyway, be able to demonstrate that they are able to monitor effectively across all the platforms that they offer to various customers. So some of the, so one operator in particular, a couple of operators I can think of, have actually invested in technology. So therefore they're developing electronic wallets, which historically were not something that would seen in the land-based industry at all. Mm-hmm. So the development of an electronic wallet in a land-based environment is the way forward. Yeah. Coming back to the point I was making about modern technology in the terms of like mobile phones, which can be tracked, monitored, not only controlled by the customer, but given an operator a much, much higher degree of confidence that we've asked the question, who are you? The technology in a mobile phone will actually answer part of that question, although not directly to the operator, but via technology. So you've answered two questions. Yes. And then over time, you're able to speak to a bank account, albeit directly. If a customer has got multiple debit cards, again, that provides an opportunity to monitor across the what would call the customer's financial profile, albeit indirectly, and gives them a much better idea of who they're playing to. Conversely, with the way the systems are at the moment, and I'm talking about the smaller operators, they're very much still operating in a cash-based environment without the opportunity, for the most part, because they lack the technology in terms of an electronic wallet. My view is the way forward for all land-based operators is to embrace the online model and move towards an online, what I would call like an offline wallet, but using the same technology to properly track the customers from the time that they are onboarded. Coming back to the point about the anonymous customer, majority, for the most part, the majority of casinos are dealing with people that use debit cards or the alternative of a mobile phone, if it were permitted.
Yeah.
You would have to be onboarded and properly identified in terms of like, who are you, and go through that onboarding process anyway before a debit card is permitted. And that obviously prevents fraud or third-party fraud risks.
Well,
so I think that.
And I guess obviously affordability plays a part into that as well, because if someone's anonymous, you obviously don't know their situations, whatever it is. So I guess that would help as well with an offline wallet, like you said, in order to really know who your customer is, and in order to obviously protect them as your customers, right?
That's right, and the other thing that fits in with that is that moving towards what I call a more electronic-based system in the land-based would encourage operators to make better use of RegTech technology in the background to use or identify a person electronically. One of the things, it's a requirement under the regs to make sure that a person's identity is up to date. So when a passport expires or a driving licence expires, that's something that you must do. Again, that has historically provided challenges, particularly for the smaller operators that haven't got a system that more automatically tells an operator when a driving license
an Excel
has
sheet
expired.
or something like that you have to manually go through, right? An example.
That's right.
Okay.
So again, that's something else that I think the industry needs to take on board. Is that with a digital ID system these days, the check can be repeated as many times as you want, whether that's done automatically or whether the operator has actually forced the check. Maybe there's a behaviour change. But again, that would, in my view, is something, hopefully, one would say that they would take it on board with the Fifth Money Laundering Directive, putting more emphasis on accepting digital ID, supported by the government and supported by the regulator.
Do you think there's an appetite in the industry for that? Because I accept what you say about the bigger brands, but we've been having this conversation for years about the online world effectively just stuck in the past on, we see them, we know them. But, there's conversations with any American about walking in with a bag of money and a driving license, they're fine. Yeah. You and I have known each other for years, we're still having the same conversation. That appetite is either going to be driven by the regulator, who's just going to have to say you're going to do it, or the operator recognising that in 5 years' time, the landscape's going to be very different from what it is now. My view is if they don't embrace this and don't accept that's where they've got to get to and take the cost aside for a second, then they're not going to have much of a business in it, because somebody's going to regulate it out of them.
I think the problems that the industry has had to date and currently is that they tend to look in the rearview mirror too much and deal with problems that have come up in terms of like regulatory failure and look at the possible fixes rather than look into what's happening in the future. One of the things I do routinely is look at the developments at the Financial Conduct Authority, and they tend to look to the future. And when they're looking at the banking industry.
How about that when the banking's ahead of our sector?
So I always look at what's happening in the banking industry to what can be applied to the gaming industry. And there's not too much, there are significant differences in terms of products, but in terms of the way that money moves around the system, they're the same. They don't change, and that will never be. They will never change. And I think for the most part is that there's got to be an understanding. I think there already is. I think the land-based industry and the people that I know very well and deal with and have done for many years at top compliance levels do accept the need to embrace electronic technology to better manage the customer journey. And that's a given.
Which is radically changing the job of a land-based casino. It's becoming, and as well as in the online, more of a forensic analysis organization to review the data and the behaviors of their customers, their users, and forensic, especially in terms of enhanced due diligence, KYC, etc. This is a radical new skill set that is requested and that is required for those.
But isn't it a mindset? It's a mindset, isn't it? You've got to have people who are going to think this is where it's going. You mentioned a point there, took around. You might renew it when the passport renews. Geez, that's every 10 years. In the online world, you're going, how going back 10 years, you might never have reviewed somebody for 10 years, but now that's simply a no-no. The drivers from the regulator are all about it's updated, it's dynamic, it's real time. It's all that, yet we're still having conversations around, I'll review them again off a spreadsheet in 5 years when the passport's renewed. And I think, I going back a little, the big operators will probably be ahead of this, whether it's new systems or whatever it's doing. But, there's a chunk of the offline industry, a bit like online in certain jurisdictions where they do nothing either, that need to get ahead of the game, because it's either the regulators or, for me, the other people we tend not to talk about a lot are consumers. The next generation, the future for the land-based sector is not guys who look like me, right? They're not going to be my age. It's not going to be that next generation coming through are just simply not going to put up with the friction that's in the way.
Yeah, and that's a very fair point. And one of the things that I've picked up on, certainly in the last 2 years or so, whenever I speak to operators, I say, look, the way you do, the way that you're monitoring or managing your systems at the moment is very labour intensive. You're not using enough technology, so your day job, which is massively overworked, is taken up to a certain extent on running reports, which, if you're using technology properly, could run the reports for you and alert you to the risks, and then you respond to them. And it's not only in relation to transaction monitoring, which is huge amount of work that the industry needs to do to play catch up on that, but also on the onboarding side. Mm-hmm. So coming back to the point you were making, if a person's passport is changed or a driving licence is changed, that's automatically stored either with the GB authorities, both the passport agency or driver vehicle licensing agency. And once that document has changed, it's stored electronically. And it's that type of, that would notify an operator on a profile change if it was held centrally.
But the question is obviously there. Is it already maybe a little bit too late for land-based casinos to do the change, or is it just like, let's say, a 5 to 12, or is it already 5 past 12? Because just to read out a statistic, so the total GGY for land-based casinos in Great Britain from April 2018 to March 2019 was £1.1 billion, which is a 10.3% decrease from last year. And you see how obviously slick it is to just register online to a casino. So why would you let's say stand at a reception for 5 or 10 minutes, or even stand in the queue for half an hour in peak times in order to have let's say fun? I know people see it as a social event, an example that they go out for some food. There's obviously different things to it, but do you think from that perspective it is maybe already a little bit too late, or is it just in time now to do the certain changes?
I think that if you look at the way in which the difference between the old 1968 Act to the 2005 Act, one thing the 1968 Act allowed is that if you became a member of the casino, you had to join up, sign up, be identified, and there was a calling off period before you were allowed to play.
Okay.
And in those days, you had to even if one operator had 30 casinos, you physically had to sign up for each individual casino as a member. There was no concept of like group membership in those days. 2005 Act obviously liberalised the system, so you're able to come in and play up to certain levels, €2,000, and an operator must demonstrate to the Commission that they've got controls at the front desk, and obviously to originally identify a player or be able to demonstrate that you can track them up to certain levels. And you do that by having lower levels than the €2,000 to put in place of like an advisory interaction with a customer. And that in itself, given the affordability levels that we've seen recently in the Gambling Commission's formal guidance notes, has brought that down to even lower levels, something as low as £250 as being the initial.
Do you think that threshold's causing the industry problems? It's probably put in for the right reasons, but having those thresholds creates this sort of maybe uncertainty.
I think coming back now, I think the land-based industry has dealt with the threshold approach very, very well and effectively. And certainly in my experience, both personally and talking to my colleagues, is that there's never been a real criticism from a regulatory point of view that the industry has not got that right. What they haven't got right over time is the ongoing source of wealth, source of funds thing, which is a different test. But coming back to the use of technology, if you look at the old 1960s casino and look at the casinos that are being offered to customers now, there is absolutely bears no resemblance. I would say that certainly some of the business model was more aligned towards leisure. That's entertainment, event space, restaurants, food and beverage. So almost to the extent you're talking about, like possibly anything up to 80% of revenue in some operators who offer that type of model, compared to 20% of gaming. Or
so where Vegas has gone, hasn't it? That's gone from 90-10 to 50-50.
That's right.
60-40
So
leisure first, yeah.
The argument's always been, and one that I would continue to support, is that why would you want to go to a casino that might offer good entertainment value, but without going through the what we call the onboarding process? Because let's face it, I wouldn't have to do that if I went into a decent pub or a restaurant in the West End. They're not going to ask me for my passport or driving licence. Why should that be replicated in the casino industry? Now, coming back to the use of technology without interfering with the customer journey, and you're absolutely right, Roger. There's no point in queuing up to have to prove who you are to simply go and have a drink or a bite to eat. So there's one other thing that the land-based industry can take on board is the use of technology by the use of an iPad or a mobile phone to intervene with a player when it's the right place to do so. Because if a person comes in and decides to use the entertainment facilities, but over a period of time, maybe during the same session, decides to have a gamble and they play to certain levels, the use of technology on the floor will avoid the need for that person to be taken back to reception, or even if they get asked a question which is too far on into the session, to say, you know what, I've had enough now, and then leave, so therefore you've lost a customer. So that's another thing through the use of mobile technology or iPads that the industry could do a lot better.
See, because I think the challenge just in that specific instance is if you're going in and you're using the leisure facilities for want of better, the moment you then go gamble, you need to be verified. How does that work? And I certainly think technology can help on that. But then we're all back to the start, is where in the process is that? Because the gap for me at the moment is around, you verify them at €2,000. Yeah? Well, everything in online is get rid of all of that. The 72 hours, everything that you do at the front end. There must be conversations sort of within the land-based sector of dragging that process forward to just do it right at the start.
That's right. So if you've got to break it down into two camps, there's also the input thing about age verification. Now, you tend to find that with anyone who, I think most young persons these days know that in order to prove their age, they have to carry some form of identity, whether that be in a passport, a pass card, or a driving licence, to a high standard. We've come down to the average person who might be on a night out, but not necessarily a planned night out to a casino destination, for example. There's a fair chance that they won't carry identification documents. They might carry a driving licence, but for the most part, unless the destination is a casino, they won't have a passport. And even foreign visitors who might be staying in London, generally will put their passport in a safe. They won't come out with it.
Yeah.
And certainly in my experience, when you've got people joining or coming in for who might want to use gaming facilities in the more high end, that they haven't got their passport with them, and they would normally have to go back or produce it or get someone else to pick it up for them. So those are the challenges. I know it's a different challenge in terms of an international customer, but for the most part, the onboarding process for a domestic or a GB customer is still, for the most part, needs to move inside the gaming environment and not necessarily always at the front door.
So I guess again, we keep bringing those business ideas out of this ID podcast. So if anyone can offer an identity terminal, that would be, I guess, fantastic for land-based casinos, because then you don't have to bring your driving license or passport, because then you type in your data and it's being matched on various databases, as an example, right? But well, I mean, obviously for essentially land-based casinos, I mean, as you said, Doug, I mean, it's obviously there's different challenges in terms of how you onboard a customer and what they have to do in order to obviously gain access to the casino. But I guess the point there again is how do we from a regulation standpoint
just a challenge on that last section there is around I think we know where the technology focus on. There's no discernible reason why you can't do that when you walk in there. The problem comes at a very senior level, in my opinion, within casinos. The moment you put some friction in the way of a customer walking in and then actually going to gamble, they tend to rein back from doing it. And it's not just the cost, it's the whole customer experience thing. And I think that's where technology hopefully will ease that burden of changing that mindset from a land-based to a more full-on identity understanding, because ultimately the benefits of fully understanding your customers are so much more than the pain to actually get there, even though that pain's reducing.
I think, if you look at, as I term it, Generation X, Generation Y, as it's termed.
What they're going to do, we're going to start
their expectation is technology.
Yeah, it's mobile phones, iPads, whatever.
Whether we like it or not, the smartphone is the thing that governs everyone's life. Everyone uses it. They rely very heavily on apps. And coming back to digital ID, the smartphone plays a vital role. In terms of like a land-based environment, for example, coming back to a busy casino on a Friday or Saturday night, now certainly in London, if you're faced with an onboarding experience in a threshold environment, in other words, you've reached a point in time where you need to prove who you are for the first point in time, having entered, which is permitted, obviously, by the money laundering regs. More often than not, that customer would have to be taken back to a busy reception desk, or in some cases a cash desk, which is in itself is going to be busy. And that in itself provides a lot of friction for the customer journey. And it is frustrating for the customer. And it's also very labour intensive for management. So one of the things that the land-based industry can do, in my view, is make both through direct communications to customers, both before they start their journey and whilst they're within their journey, is alternative means of sign-up. So in a quick 5 minutes, for example, sitting in the bar, what can I do? I can actually go online with my driving licence or my passport. I can take a selfie. I can identify myself. And that in itself would smooth the journey. And that's something that the land-based sector can embrace.
Yes, I guess like an express lane or whatever. So you would have people going into the, let's say, restaurant or like the bar bit. Then actually, something says, please go on this website or download this application.
Exactly.
And then, you can pick up your pass at the desk where it's only pickup, right? I think, genuinely, I think, that's I think...
so maybe the land-based is actually the opportunity for the land-based is to miss out all that old-style clunky name, address, date of birth stuff and almost just forget about it and go straight to technology.
I don't want to make receptionists redundant in the industry, but they
obviously will be still needed.
So to smooth the customer process, you can have these pods or terminals which allow you to scan the passport and the ID document, take a photograph. And already, casinos for a number of years now have been taking photographs routinely of people that they onboard, which is different from the online sector.
Yeah, people know it.
They are used to it.
Well, we know that.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the one I was involved in that did exactly that. It was an interesting experience because as they walked in, what they would have had on a busy Friday evening is some sort of standoff as people are wanting to get in and get told by the person on the door that they can't. The trial of this went in, as long as you proved your driving license and your passport, it took away all the aggression, because it was almost like the computer said, no, that passport doesn't link to something. And the interesting unintended consequence maybe was the actual process got better and removed the friction and the point of aggression where people couldn't get in.
And it's less intrusive, particularly at the start of the relationship. That's my view.
I think so. I think one of the really interesting stuff was it was part of NEC, which is the big Japanese conglomerate who do cities and all of that sort of stuff. What they found when they were doing their testing, right, is they had two big problems. Well, if you take away the quality of the camera, which is improving. One was the lighting, because lighting in a casino is very difficult for when they were trying to introduce facial recognition. And the other one, if you just put a camera up there, nobody looks up there.
Yeah.
They all look down there on the phone. Yeah. So they hadn't thought of this. They're walking in going, everybody's got their head down. And when you've got one like mine, it reflects the light, which is not great. But that's it. It's how do you do that? So I think the point there is get yourself verified. It's down to the onus is on the operator to make that as seamless as possible. But I absolutely believe that next generation is going to expect that, and the power ultimately is going to be in your smartphone. Everything's going to be in there.
And again, I think it was actually one of the points that Jeremie mentioned in, I think, the first or second podcast. Like, if we would improve customer messaging in a way where it's friendly. I mean, customers nowadays, they don't like speaking to people. I mean, essentially, the younger generations, they just all they like to do is, even though they're all in one room, they still on like WhatsApp and like texting themselves. So, if we would improve essentially our customer messaging and make it as friendly as possible, I think people are more receptive to just seeing signs where things are there, and then again you're going away from this human to human thing because. Let's face it, sometimes you see a person and you think, don't like him or whatever, and then it just all becomes this whole emotion thing. So if we take out the emotion a little bit, just make it a little bit easier for everyone involved, I think, obviously, again, then you would see that the whole scene of casinos will flourish because, it's actually a pleasant experience that you would have instead of, being at a reception, maybe, in handwriting, writing out your name, your address, etc. I think it would obviously improve the whole process. I mean, in my opinion, obviously.
And you're still seeing that, particularly in the smaller operators. There's still a written application form that's still being used.
I've done one. I'm saying that because I had a friend from Germany over, and he saw a casino. I mean, I'm not going to name it, but and he said, can we go in, because I've never been in one in the UK, and it looked nice from the outside. So we went in, and first of all there was a queue, waited 20 minutes. And then when we got to the desk, can you please fill in this application form? And you literally had to do it by handwriting. So the whole process of us, queuing and getting into the casino was almost 45 minutes. So it's.
Can I ask Jeremy a question on this? Because I think there's an onus on the
you can
brands
ask,
to do that.
I don't guarantee I will
answer the answers. Because your experience with, say, the platform side. So if you look at the smaller operators and the big ones, have they been treating the land-based sector differently from online? So for me, I look at the land-based and go, there's potentially a single point of failure with the one main platform that's controlling most of it. So have they been treating it differently, and are they providing enough innovation to help the industry
out? Platform providers?
Yeah.
The platform providers, where I have been involved a few years ago, it was already taking, with the big names of the UK industry, this convergence with the cards, the loyalty cards, and link to the player wallets. But there was always this requirement from the operators of the land-based industry of constantly having those two parallel streams of, yes, this is the ultimate stream that we want, the card, the player tracking, but we will have to have in place a solution also for anonymous playing.
They don't want to get rid of that.
One-time betting in the shop, and it's more around the betting shops than the casino operators themselves. This is the friction has come because I remember the first Raising Standard conference from the UKGC 4 years ago. I think Jim Mullen was claiming his historical love of the shops, how the parents were taking, and it was a social activity, and explaining why anonymity is still important, because you have the occasional punter. He doesn't want to go and to provide all his details. This is absolutely not my area of. I'm probably younger in those generations than I am really on the paper, but the solutions provided by the platforms was always reflective of those existing frictions.
And the reason I asked is because there's one main provider into the land-based sector, and your point around the smaller operators potentially struggling to put this system in where the big boys can, that might be something, if you've got pretty much most of the market, you could solve that issue or help provide that. And all around sustainability and, yes, the commercial entity, but there's a way there of making those processes, whether it's just reporting, taking away any written paperwork or the majority of it, and providing that. The reason I asked is my view is they did treat the two separately. Yeah. So the online guys
always.
I mean, I still.
That's a podcast in itself, that one, yeah. But I know exactly what you mean, yeah.
But that's what they do. That's their job, and they do it. So I don't think it would be ever a problem.
I think exactly. But look, let's break that question down into two parts. So the first question is in relation to the means of payment technology. Without going over again the arguments I put forward for the use of contactless through a mobile phone, which I think still has currency in the land-based environment, as something that should be looked at seriously going forward and supported by the regulator, provided the operators can demonstrate that they've got the controls to track, monitor and make sure that responsible limits are imposed. So that's in relation to means of payment. In terms of your experience of having to wait 45 minutes to be onboarded and prove who you are in terms of a passport, that in itself that's provided a lot of friction to your enjoyment. Take that forward to your guest from overseas who may be used to probably the same onboarding experience, but maybe a lot quicker.
I mean, in Germany, you don't have to do anything. It's just that you walk in and it's
that's
like...
right. But 45 minutes, certainly from an operator's point of view, I would say from a managing director's point of view, would be unacceptable. Yeah. But coming back to the use of alternative technology in terms of which doesn't necessarily require human intervention, but as an alternative. So on a busy Friday or Saturday night, you could have a terminal that could be effectively used by operators to actually make it quicker. So for example, if you had not only terminals at the reception area, but maybe inside that they could go to, complete the onboarding process, scan the means of ID that they've got on them, assuming of course they've got the ID on them. But once the details have been input to the requirements that have been asked, it goes away, it does the necessary ID checks, whichever provider they're using. It checks against those data sets, and it also, importantly, meets the requirements of PEPs and sanction screening, which determined upon your risk model is something which is certainly in London is a must. In a more provincial casino, PEP screening probably less important, depending upon who the customer is, but certainly a must as far as sanction screening is concerned. So you've dealt with all of that without, and that hasn't caused any friction to the customer at all. Also importantly, the use of that technology allows it to talk to, for example, the SENSE database, which is the National Self-Exclusion Scheme for land-based casinos, which has always been a good tool. But that in itself would also provide by good technology, stuff that can be identified. And let's face it, if someone does get identified as a self-excluded person, technology is going to identify that very quickly. It's going to notify a manager who can then interact with the customer and make sure that they're not spending money.
And again, I mean, it obviously shows the right steps. If obviously, let's say, a customer would have had too much to drink, let's say on a night, and just steps by on his way home in a casino. I think obviously a nice touch to as a casino to the customer, if someone like a senior manager will come over, sir, we've actually identify you as a self-excluded customer. So I think it's a totally different conversation than if be anonymous, and then the customer, next day saying, why did you let me play? I was on the list, like as an example, right?
I mean, that's something which is one thing that the Landbased has a distinct advantage over online, is that they can detect fairly quickly and control alcohol intake. They can check very quickly through the use of checking with the Sense database or the membership database whether there's a history of self-exclusion. And without, like online has those challenges because they're not hooked up with a customer via Skype. They can't tell if an online customer is intoxicated. They've got algorithms and behaviours built in, but that's not necessarily going to detect whether a person's intoxicated. So they have distinct advantages.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Yeah, absolutely, I agree.
But I think the self-exclusion question is just a big flaw in you said it works. It's just a big flaw in the online world because you're trying to self-exclude them once they're in there. Politically, that's simply going to be unacceptable. It's as they go through the door, how do we detect them then? And I think the UK has got 4 different self-exclusion systems. They need to join those up. I know Malta have got a pretty ambitious project for theirs. But the challenge certainly from self-exclusion is you don't want to be self-excluding or recognising it once they're in there. And it is a different challenge for the land-based, but it's one you've got to accept that the starting point is to, as people walk through the door, back to your comment earlier about identifying people at the start of a process, not once they hit €2,000 or not once they've been in there, and take away the challenges of it's land-based, it's leisure activity, and then that there's a way of identifying that. And so I still think there's personally, I think there's huge gaps in that whole and certainly then get onto retail. I know there's people looking at retail projects from the betting shops around there and facial recognition, because their argument that the walk in and the person behind the counter knows them simply doesn't stand up. It might do in some, but you just walk from one to another. Okay, it's going to be a lot less of them nowadays. But that process is fraught with difficulties. And so somehow technology can really be the only answer. Like any form of KYC, take care of the 80% and leave the 20% of the people who are in the casino or are in the betting shop who can engage with them on a one-to-one level.
I think from what I've seen from personal perspective during my work is that there's been quite a substantial increase in customers who have spent, without naming a figure, but a sum of money which is probably larger than what they can afford to play, who are self-excluded. So, and one of the things they're saying that you allowed me in, I've spent X. Gambling Commission have made it quite clear that you should check how much I can afford to spend before I play, so therefore I want my money back. Now, again, without looking at a figure that might be appropriate to be applied, I think it's clear that the consumer has been educated by the Gambling Commission, and probably quite rightly so. So how do you balance that up, and what type of controls do you have in place in a land-based environment? I think certainly the larger operators, their first, what I would call pinch point, is a lower threshold of speaking or interacting with a player before they reach that €2,000 threshold. I think most operators are around about the 1,500 sterling equivalent, which is probably the right time to intervene.
Which is so far away from the threshold that is now identified by the Gambling Commission.
But they must have in my view, there's a lower level which provides what we call the first interaction points, and that's advising a player that if they do reach a point in time, then they may have to provide ID if they've not already been saying, who are you? Question in the first place.
Just back to why aren't they done at the start? Because we're arguing about stuff we don't need to argue about, right? If you were identifying somebody, as you now have to do in an online world, right at the start, you wouldn't be having any of these conversations.
No, but it does bring on top of that the topic of affordability, because those thresholds are a sort of reality check that the interaction what they call the customer interaction, but which is basically the asset from the land-based industry, that they have the human relationship with the customers. The interaction should be, by default, taking in consideration that this is the average available income in UK. This is the average until I don't know, until it isn't proven.
But if we don't solve affordability or find some sort of acceptable solution, we're going to end up where some of the Nordics are ending up, which is you can just bet to a certain level. That's, I think, in the political focus we've got at the moment, is if we don't find an acceptable
We said no
solution,
political.
well, no political, that's after Friday, because they're all talking about it. But we'll end up with we'll call everybody, I don't know, £500. And then once you get to that, there's some really onerous process, or you stop them betting. Yeah, and that's not good. That affordability is such a key thing for me now, which is, and don't just concentrate. We mentioned you hit the word VIP, and I'd absolutely agree with you. It's actually the worst problems are for the people who haven't got the money. We can argue to death whether somebody's betting £5,000 a night or whatever it might be, but it's the people on a lot less money that the affordabilities. And we are walking into a problem the industry's going to have. The payday loan sector, the short-term loan sector, was 5, maybe 8 years ago, which was, it's almost killed that industry because they didn't have these processes, and we can't trust self-regulation to do it. So I think the key focus for me is going to be how, between us all, suppliers, operators, vendors, regulators, come up with some workable affordability. Not like the UK Gambling Commission is doing, just go and find a solution. Yeah, you've got to work together to do that. I don't think open banking's the solution. The answer is I don't know what it is, but unless the industry pulls together to work out best practice in that, I think we're going to struggle.
I think, and as I think I said last time, I think there needs to be a lot more conversation between essentially financial services sector and the gaming sector, because the data that both of the sectors have, and when you put it together, I think it's a very, very powerful tool to then again, coming back to your point from some episodes ago, to do more self-empowerment of players, to let them have the data to obviously, because if they can afford, like, they wouldn't have a problem to say, well, here's my data, I've provided that to other people, but obviously, other people that might not afford it, they might not do it. So you then just say, well, your limit is
you mentioned
this
earlier,
and this.
Absolutely. You mentioned earlier the FCA and what sort of different sort of regulatory bodies are doing. Have you seen anything from that sector that is going to sort of waterfall down in 2 hours? Or?
I think certainly if it's quite clear that the top banks and even the challenger banks are talking to each other in terms of like sharing customer data, and there's this concept of open banking by customer consent to openly share your data to give you two fronts. Certainly from an affordability point of view, a snapshot to whoever that customer might be banking with of the overall position to best estimates only in some cases, but it certainly gives you a better idea of what the customers afford.
They have made progress also in terms of offering blocking solutions to customers that have gambling problems.
Yeah.
I think they have listened to our podcast, which is very encouraging.
Yeah, no, seriously. I mean, since we've done the first podcast, and obviously, Peter started his podcast with obviously the former Skybet CEO, so I can definitely recommend.
Thanks for the plug.
So I can definitely recommend to have a look at that. But I think since first trend that I've seen, I think there's now about 15 gaming podcasts that have come up to it. Secondly, at every event, and I'm not even joking here, as we started doing the first gaming podcast, I heard the same things over and over again that we said on the previous podcast, and that cannot be a coincidence, because I think some people are afraid of saying some things because it might come back to them.
If you ever go to a gambling conference, people over the years, Jeremie will back this up, if you have a regulator on the panel, they tend not to say much. But we all recognise what the problems are.
Well, unless you are on the Gaming in Spain conference.
Well, yes, that was slightly different. But that's what we need more of. We need to challenge the regulators. They need to challenge the operators. Everybody here has to pull it together. But the key issues are not going to go away. And we all know what they are. So my challenge here is we talk about them all the time. So how do we solve them? Is there anything in the last 12 months that's discernibly moved the dial forward on
Nope.
doing this. And that, we're part of that. So how do we look at the affordability, the understanding? Because for me, a lot of it boils to truly knowing that customer. So whether it's the tech and data you've got, or whether it's the tech and data, but I think for me, the one big thing is how do we share that? You've got banks, financial services sharing data. What is it that's stopping us? And for me, the regulator has to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And at the end of the day, you have to have a working group that is really kind of, really looking at the specific things. First of all, it's obviously, the technology that's available. Let's have a really good look at it. Let's basically do a profile of the technology. What exactly does it give me, right? Then the regulator can say, okay, technology A is doing this and this, technology B, blah, blah. So how do we kind of involve that within the regulation? And then secondly, to come together with operators, be it online, be it land-based, and then to really work out something. But
so what drove the financial services sector to share data? Because you can have as many workshops as you want. I love a good workshop. Yeah, we all talk and have a nice cup of tea. But what comes out of it? So what drove the banks and the insurance companies? Probably fraud initially, but they've done it. Why can't we just say, look, we know it's best practice. Yeah, well, that's self-exclusions, dragging us screaming, kicking into sharing data. We know it's best. Set up a working group? I don't know. It might take us a couple of steps forward.
That executes something, that actually does something instead of just, being hot there. Because, how many times was there, X, Y, and Z are sitting together? Well...
So what's your views on the whole FCA
there.
banking sector sharing data? Because I would assume it was AML stuff to start with. Is it
I think driven by AML in the first place, but very much now driven by affordability, particularly when it comes down to the use of credit or payday loans. And more visibility in the banks. The expectation, if a bank, there's one thing that's from my own personal experience. For example, looking at customers' bank statements or credit card statements, when I look at them, the first question that comes up in my mind is, what are the banks doing to alert the company or the person that's dealing with these payments to that risk from an affordability point of view? Because I've seen it time and time again.
And the answer is? Huh? And the answer is, what are they doing?
Is it nothing?
So, my question is, what are they doing? But without actually challenging them, we don't know whether they're reporting SARS in the background or whether they're reporting back or dialogue between the two. The perception is, certainly what's been saying now in the financial sector, is that they are now talking to each other to actually address those risks. And therefore, particularly in the credit card sector, there's more onus upon a credit card issuer to impose limits which are responsible depending on a person's financial circumstances. I want to come back to that point. The land-based sector in Great Britain cannot accept credit cards, so there's a distinct difference between that and the online sector at the moment. Yeah. And obviously pending any decision that might come up.
That's part of the 2020 predictions.
In 2020. One of the... dealing with the regulator's view is that the only way that a operator can take a view or an informed view of affordability of a customer is A, they know what they do for a living. They know ostensibly have a fair idea of their underlying source of wealth and where necessary, depending upon their spend levels or where the money's coming from, the source of funds. The things that are missing at the moment, there's, in my view, too much reliance upon demanding bank statements or wage slips. For example, it's very easy to produce a wage slip, which is false. You can do it online, download a template, populate it, and create a wage slip. It's also very easy to cut and paste a bank statement. So unless you've actually got the trained eye, which comes back to over-reliance on bank statements, in my view, also requires an operator to have a back-office team that is available to look at the bank statements critically and be able to deal with it effectively. Yeah. So my view is that there's, over time, certainly in the last couple of years, because the regulator insists on bank statements as being the gold standard, there's been an over-reliance on operators to insist on bank statements from customers. So coming back to what I call data in the background, if we look at the use of digital ledger technology, Again, not necessarily look into the future to a certain extent, but look in what's happening now. If you ask the right questions, for example, in terms of like their person's tax position or when they last paid tax, whether or not they've got a national insurance number, and that's two numbers which are separate and distinct, but nevertheless are registered in a central database. Whether or not they're PAYE or self-employed is again another thing that needs to take into account. To a certain extent, if that's done fairly early on or at the appropriate time, that gives an overview or gives an opportunity for an operator to set a benchmark on who they're doing business with. And certainly when you look at bank statements, what does it give you? Depending on how many months bank statements it gives you a historic view of where the money's coming from. It will not give you, and it's only a snapshot in time. So one of the things that's presenting challenges for the operators at the moment is how many times do I ask for bank statements and how often?
Yeah,
now, I know that's going to be dictated by a person's spend levels, but I think that there's better ways of doing it. And certainly the use, from what I've seen,
so what would you say that is then? What's the better ways of doing that?
Well, I'd say if you ask, for example, if you apply for a loan or a credit or a mortgage, you're answering probably 2 hours worth of questions, whether that be via a human body recording it on a computer, which goes out and asks several questions and gives you an answer in terms of affordability for a mortgage. Now, all of those questions and answers are recorded and they're stored. They go out and they ask for a decision to be made and they score against Credit Reference Agency, for example. But that data is stored. Now, once you give the questions and answers, it's there. Now, the use of blockchain technology and the digital ledger will store that information. Now, once you've answered a question, and the same thing can apply by gambling operators, you store it. And if the same questions and answers are offered by another gambling operator, for example, and they go out and test what's there, then they can come up with discrepancies.
Yeah, this is exactly what I'm praying for, and
but
I've been saying every time. It just makes it so much easier.
So my message is that there has to be more investment and more acknowledgement by the regulator and supported by the regulator, but more drive from the operator's point of view. So use less intrusive methods of affordability without necessarily looking at bank statements. Now, I know that, just quickly, the open banking, there's been an open banking trial which was driven by Barclays, I think, and Experian. I don't know the full results of that, but I think anecdotally the feedback is that the take-up has been slow in gambling. I don't know how successful that's been overall in the financial sector, but when I look at some of the comments from some of the challenger banks and indeed some of the other banks, the general take-up of open banking, in other words, giving permission to everyone to look at your financial position, has generally not been slow.
Yeah, I think we're in a country that didn't want a national ID number, so we're unlikely to be
or a national ID card.
And then take into the toxicity of the brand we all work in, which is gambling. That for me, that's never going to be
the open banking project is not clearly enough defined in terms of protection of consumer, or more precisely even the potential misusages by the operators that are connecting to open banking. Open banking has been designed first and foremost also around the AML 5D and in order to promote innovation so that consumer will get better visibility on their accounts, better visibility on the competing pricings, etc. And we are ending in a situation in the gambling where we have a lot of third-party vendors that are offering the open banking connect basically for players to the operators, which is granting full access to all the banking data of this customer with, of course, the other operators and their own life and so on. And I think that the problem is that open banking has not been properly defined as, okay, who can use what sort of data, who can see what sort of data, because there is a lot that can be done with relative data rather than if you compare the banking spending, etc., with the operator, the player spending at the operator without having access to the full numbers, you create a scoring mechanism that enables the operator to understand his player's relative position compared to his affordability without exposing all the numbers. And today open banking is very black or white. Either you expose your number, either you undress, or we cannot do anything for you.
I love the French guy brought the nakedness in. Look, I'll be dead simple on open banking. It's not the answer.
So, actually, like open banking is on the agenda for next year because it's obviously becoming more and more, I guess, prominent. And if someone would actually care to explain to the public what open banking actually means, that'd be great as well. I mean, from a governmental, from obviously that point of view, but. I guess just obviously because we've just been over an hour already, so I just want to hear from all of you, like let's say like your one or two prediction what's going to happen in 2020. Let's start you with Jeremie.
So 2020 predictions. I think I will start with how this podcast started. I think it's all around disruption, innovation, and regulation. The combination and the meeting of all those aspects, and more precisely, like we said at the beginning of this episode of the podcast, I think UK will be less relevant in terms of online pressure for, not that the regulation pressure is going to go away, but the operators simply are going to go away, and the whole objective of consumer fairness is also starting to go away in smoke because there is less and less competition, less and less operators, and we will be able to see a real negative impact on the consumers. But otherwise, technology...
That's positive.
Yeah. Not for the consumer and not for the regulator. I mean, the industry numbers are already starting to decline, and the industry operators have also started to go away from the market. The US is going to take, of course, a big share of the attention, and I strongly believe again that Apple, probably Google as well, and somehow Amazon around.
Do you think that's in the next 12 months? I absolutely agree with you.
Yes, because sports betting and gambling being now legal in the US is the open door for those companies to start tackling the topic. And the fact that Apple has started to provide its technical guidance on native development of its apps, they are going to take really a much bigger role. The question is not the bigger role that they are going to take, but rather in terms of regulation, what bigger responsibility they will want to, because they could be the perfect intermediary body to combine and retain all this information, which they already retain on the phones, and partner with the industry. I don't think that they will partner with the industry. I think that they will try to offer their own version of the industry.
So, and I mean, this is for the viewers, or one for the viewers, which I would like to see in the comments. Who do you think will regulate those giants? And would that also then pose, because it's only 2 or 3 companies offering that service, would that be also bad to the consumer? But let that be out there.
Okay, just my initial answer to that, I think we will, for UK at least, we will see a reproduction of the Uber story in London, like disruption, self-regulation, and creating their own rules, and some authorities, local authorities, basically confronting them and not letting them go. This is what will happen in UK. This will push even for more exodus of gambling, international gambling companies from UK. So self-regulation from their own authority and arrogance.
And as we know, self-regulation obviously works very well, and it works really well in the gaming industry. So, Doug, what are your predictions for next year?
I think if look at my predictions, I think affordability is going to provide a challenge for operators going forward into 2020. The recently revised Social Responsibility Code, which deals with customer interaction, both for the online and offline model, indeed all operators, is a new challenge. Whilst the formal guidance notes were issued in summer, I think it's fair to say, certainly from my experience, that both the operators, their staff, and the regulator are still struggling or still learning how to understand what that process entails. I think 2020 will be a continuing learning curve, both for the operators and the regulator. And I think that's something that the regulator should also take into consideration. The other important thing is that in order to get to a good position, and this is the gambling industry in general, and I think that one would hope that the Betting and Gaming Council, that now encompasses, I think, 80% of the membership of the GB operators, will look at what we call trying to achieve a level playing field in terms of reasonable thresholds for affordability and KYC. And at the moment, if you can't reach that agreement, there's almost a danger that the people that are looking for the best KYC deal is probably the best way to put it, whether that be for the right or the wrong reasons. Is the risk is they're going to be pushed from one place to another until they get the right answer. That's something that the industry does need to address in partnership with each other. And also, and I think that to the extent that I think from my view, the message is that you can achieve a commonality in KYC, which is the right place to be, and at the same time concentrate on offering a better market services, which you can achieve, which can be done separately from KYC, but not trying to gain an advantage from a KYC by unrealistic thresholds. That's my horizon for 2020.
Well, I think if you look at the three main sort of stakeholders in the sector, you've got the operators. That's going to be about regulation. It's driving the merger and activity, and whatever went on with Flutter, we're only going to see that happening more, which is an interesting challenge for everybody.
Next one, which one?
Oh no, we're not putting that's outside of the podcast. So, and for them, it's regulation. So if this year was the US, UK, Sweden, and advertising anywhere, then I think we've got more US coming. Dutch is the big one that's coming, European-wise, next year, even though regulation's not the year after. More of the US. Can Germany sort itself out? It's that part. Well, exactly. It's that part of regulation. If you're the regulator, then it's a case of they're going to rewrite the regs. We've got a new political party coming in at some point later on this week, and then let's see what happens. Because I think if we were talking earlier, if one side comes in, something's going to happen. If the other side comes in, probably not. But we're absolutely looking at a rewrite of the regs, and that's something for the UK to get its head around. And finally, the third one would be the customers. And I think with the political focus on the sector at the moment, expect more friction. If it's not credit cards, it'll be something else. If they're going to bring in more enhanced due diligence. So we're talking about having less friction. I think in the short term, we're probably going to see more. So that's probably those three areas I'd look at.
Expect more friction, meaning that the consequence will be expect a rise in illegal activities or borderline activities that are not yet considered gambling, but that could be very similar to gambling?
I think it's two subjects there. I think it will drive, there is an argument to say it will drive people off the regulated markets. Probably not so much here in the UK, but certainly in other sectors like the Dutch one. But if you're talking about different potential games or loot boxes or whatever it might be, the regulator's struggling to get their head around what they already know. So trying to get their head around that's going to be a different challenge. But there's regulation coming that way as well. And we haven't even got onto advertising. So,
I mean, I think for myself is one prediction. I think South America will be the market next year. I think with Brazil, Argentina. Also any other countries, I mean, like, even Chile, Peru, I think it will be a very, very hot market next year. And I think the second one will be, I mean, it's just, I think credit card payments and online will be gone. And probably the third one is, and well, I mean, I'm being very hopeful here, but I think Germany's going to propose a proper licensing model. So, well, I mean, we're going to give it our all. I mean, we've got someone in obviously our company that actually deals with the regulators and obviously being on the case there.
Look, I think we'd all hope for it. But
we all hope for it. Just to make
when you get to a certain
right?
age, the fact is, we've seen some of this before, but let's hope it's true because it's probably the biggest market out there outside of the UK that's ripe and ready. If you can get your 16 states or whatever it is to somehow pull together, that's the challenge I see. But ultimately, if you've got that political will, then you're going to get it. So let's hope that's the right one. Yeah,
exactly. And I think just obviously from IDpodcast side of things, I mean the support, the comments, I think the views and how long people actually viewed it just obviously speaks for itself. So just wanted to say a massive thank you for for everyone who has been involved, obviously from, let's say, the expert side of things, and but to obviously bring it to people and create some, I would say, viable and fun content in a short space of time, rather than reading some white papers that have really small kind of letters, to then read for 1 hour. So that's the first thing. Second thing is obviously next year, even bigger things to come. So as you heard, open banking is on the agenda. We've got someone actually joining from the financial services industry. Who it is, I'm not going to say yet. We actually have or have already four operators that agreed to come on the podcast. Some of them even together. So we can really provide that industry.
So that's the next merger.
That's me and you out of a job, Jeremie.
Yeah, indeed.
But that's the right thing to do. Look, you said earlier there's lots of podcasts out there, and whilst we may have been right at the forefront,
but are they podcasts though?
But you just need people talking. We're talking about collaboration, getting people to do things together.
The radio guys.
Unless you can encourage them into the one room to have a conversation, and also, and hopefully we haven't been. Not just the standard, say the right thing for the regulator. We've got to challenge regulators. They've got to challenge providers and suppliers. So don't be afraid of not that you are, but don't be afraid of the hard questions, because if we don't ask them,
I mean, I'm just here, sitting on my, sitting in my nice place. So I'd actually,
he's the Piers Morgan of the industry.
No, come on now, no, that's too much.
I know you did diversity last time.
Right, but anyway, I mean, thanks again to all three of you for obviously being part of it. Roger. For being part of it this year. Really looking forward to next year. Just Merry Christmas to everyone who's celebrating, and a very, very happy New Year and a good start to the new year. Thanks very much for listening. That was episode 5. We're out.